24 hours before, tens of thousands of children in Gaza had been dancing ecstatically in the dusty streets of the stricken Gaza Strip. They were celebrating the acceptance by the Palestinian resistance factions of a ceasefire. A ceasefire the whole world, in the governments of the West in particular, had been demanding that they accept. Less than 24 hours later, many of those children were dead. Many of their mothers were dead. Many of their fathers, their brothers and sisters were dead because Israel rejected the ceasefire and began the latest chapter of the massacre that is the genocide in Gaza. The Western governments had all made clear to Netanyahu that they would not accept an invasion of Rafah, the tent city of 1.6 million people on the Egyptian frontier, where people were living on the street in tents in massive numbers, a more dense population than the city of Paris. The people there were reassured that Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, little soldier Schultz, they were all against an invasion of Rafah. And they are the people making Israel's genocide possible in the first place. They're providing the weapons, the money, the diplomatic support, the cover at the UN. So surely Netanyahu could not go ahead and do it, but he has gone ahead and done it. The Egyptian state, a country of 120 million faithful Arab and mainly Muslim people, have had to watch on in horror as their government, their armed forces are silent, motionless, whilst their own frontier is taken over by the Israel they have twice fought in 1973 and 1967. The Egyptian people are motionless and silent. But what about the people whose governments in the West were either lying when they said they'd told Netanyahu not to do this, or this mad dog is out of control, such that he can tell the very countries, governments, systems on which he depends to go and do one. We'll do what we like. We'll kill who we like, whether they're children or women or old men. We'll kill who we like, whether you like it or not. So the whole world now waits to see what these Western governments that were demanding Hamas ceasefire have to say about the fact that the moment that Hamas did cease fire, they invaded. And this invasion runs the real risk of becoming the single greatest war crime seen in the world since the Second World War. Just think about that. And moreover, this massacre is not just being televised, though they've done everything they could, murdering journalists, closing TV networks. It's not just being televised. This genocide is being live streamed. The entire world is watching, and watching the politicians who enabled it to happen. I think this is going to be the mother of all weeks. I think this week is going to see a democratic uprising in Western countries against their governments and their so-called oppositions who have paved the way to this new catastrophe, this new Nakba. The Palestinian people, whose steadfastness, whose sacrifice has made everyone in the world wake up to the true nature of this Netanyahu apartheid, genocidal, so-called state, this Palestinian people have become the byword for heroism, have become the moral center of the universe. This is Have It Out with Galloway, where I have top guests and top contributors on the video wall from amongst the audience. It's quite unique. I'm glad you came. Maram Susli, also known as the Syrian Girl, is a YouTube content creator, political analyst, and commentator who has become famous throughout the world. Media outlets on which she regularly contributes include RT, Press TV, and Al Mayadeen, three networks on which I have myself previously worked. Let's talk with Maram now. It's very difficult to remain cool, calm, and collected, Maram, in the face of what we have seen in Gaza. I'm interested to hear from you how you think the Arab masses in the countries that are either actively collaborating with all this or remaining paralyzed with fear and with the status of beggars, unable to do anything that their population wants them to do. What do you think all of the last few hours will have done to public opinion amongst the Arabs?
Well, this entire war has been very revealing. You know, at the time, there was all these conspiracy theories about running throughout the Arab world that Iran isn't really against Israel, and the real bulwark for the resistance is in the Sunni heartlands of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. But you know, even as a Sunni myself, it's become very obvious that these regimes in Turkey and Saudi Arabia have nothing but hollow words to offer the Palestinian people. And the only actions have been from the resistance axis, which include Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. And I think that what's going to happen in the next few days is further instability in Jordan and in Egypt and throughout the world, throughout every nation that's subservient to Israel. And my hope is that they overthrow those governments and have what would be a genuine democracy, because what's really happening right now in these nations, in Jordan and Egypt and in the West, is a Zionist takeover. And we have to just say it like it is. The Zionists are in control, and it's a Zionist dictatorship in every one of these Western countries and in Arabia as a whole.
But 99%, that's an official polling result, of the people of Saudi Arabia, a great Arab Muslim people, 99%, I'm guessing, in Jordan, in Egypt, stand completely opposed to what's happening to their brethren not so far away in the case of Jordan and Egypt. How can their governments survive the wrath of their own people after this?
The hope is that they won't survive, except for Egypt. Perhaps if Egypt starts to withdraw from the peace treaty that they have with Israel, then they may survive. Perhaps if Jordan were to withdraw from the peace treaty that they have with Israel, perhaps then they could save themselves. Perhaps if they made good on those threats that they did a few months ago of pulling away from those treaties, maybe even if they begin to symbolically do so by pulling their ambassadors, making more hardline statements, that may save them for now. But the thing is that if the Strafa continues and there's going to be hundreds of thousands of Palestinians storming the gates of Egypt. It's going to be interesting to see what Egypt's going to do about that. The other possibility is, Israel is possibly again, these are liars, and they bluff a lot, they lie a lot. We saw with Iran, they faked a retaliation against Iran. It's possible that this is another one of their negotiation tactics. They murder a bunch of civilians, and then they see if that's going to change things when it comes to negotiations for them. That's their modus operandi.
Well, one thing that isn't fake is that Egypt said that an Israeli occupation of the Philadelphia corridor, that's the strip of land separating Gaza from the Egyptian Republic, would be an act of war and would cause a breakdown in relations between Egypt and Israel. Both of them allies and recipients of the two biggest amounts of foreign expenditure by the United States in military and finance. Two of America's allies seriously at war with each other. Could that happen?
Well, I would say that the only reason that Egypt has agreed to this sort of, uh, Cold War or tentative peace with Israel is because of its own security. It is accepting essentially a large bribe from the United States to maintain this peace along the border. And what is no longer going to be good for Israel's security is if Israel takes over this corridor and pushes the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip, which they said that they want to do very blatantly. Many of their ministers have said that, including Ben-Gvir, and into the Sinai Desert, where essentially what will happen is the entire Gaza Strip is going to move down into the Sinai. And Egypt knows very well that Israel has designs on reoccupying the Sinai and taking over the Suez Canal. So they're going to see this as a step in that direction, a threat to their own national security, and a threat to the stability of their regime. So I wonder if they will act in their interests, if they have the guts to act in their interests, or if they're going to be afraid of the money being cut off. This is a question of whether they are truly patriots inside Egypt in their government that would put Egypt ahead, not even just the Palestinian people, but put Egypt ahead of their own back pockets.
Now let's look west. All these Western governments, including the parliament in which I sit, demanded and blamed actually the Palestinian side for the failure to agree to a ceasefire. Then as soon as the Palestinian side agreed to a ceasefire, this red line, which they'd all described, of an invasion of Rafah began. How do these Western governments survive that?
They're very clearly now morally bankrupt. All of their talk of humanitarian wars and their support of Ukraine and claims of war crimes there, it's all now completely bankrupt. They have no pedestal to stand on, and it's ironic that a member of Biden's team, he tweets, there's his social media team, one of them called Biden Wins. He came out with breaking: President Biden has just secured a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, and then he had to delete that tweet. All of this claims of the US Democrats being the peaceful side who don't support genocide, that's all now ended with Genocide Joe. And history will remember this. This is going to change everything. Just as Jesus Christ was sacrificed and crucified, that changed history. In the same way, Rafah is going to change history, and it's going to mark not only the end of the occupation, but the end of the Zionist project completely, and perhaps the end of the Zionist stranglehold over these governments in the West that are completely subservient and have become exposed for the world to see and for their populations.
Now, as you know, I've been involved in this issue for 50 years. I never thought I'd see the uprising that's happening in the United States amongst young people there, including young American Jews in significant numbers. I never thought I'd see these big university names, Yale, Harvard, the University of Southern California, University of Vermont, where my own wife studied. I never thought I'd see these places become Palestinian encampments. Have you been surprised by that?
I'm surprised there isn't more. I'm surprised that it hasn't escalated. But unfortunately, this is the slow burn that we're seeing. But I think eventually we will get there. I mean, I believe in the humanity of people, and I believe that Americans do want to see peace and they don't want to be involved in these foreign wars anymore. What is surprising to me is even amongst right-wing conservatives, at a Trump rally recently, they were chanting Genocide Joe. I mean, this is a bipartisan support of the Palestinian cause. I think it should start with the universities where young people have ideals, but it should really spread into the workforce, and maybe we can see some strikes there as well.
The brutal treatment of the protesters in the US has, of course, killed something new. It's killed the idea that the American people were free, that it was the land of the free, the home of the brave. It had a constitution which guaranteed freedom of speech. It's the First Amendment. It's called the First Amendment for a reason. All of that has been slaughtered for Netanyahu, hasn't it?
You're absolutely right. The new bill that they were trying to implement, which defines anti-Semitism as criticism of the state of Israel, is also like a death knell to the U.S. Constitution, and it just goes to show how fragile this veil of democracy really was. Because a few like young people camping out on a lawn is enough for them to go crazy and start enacting violence. And as things become more violent, as things escalate, things will become more violent. And I believe that, the state violence against the protesters, that's going to play a role in exposing the West and the fake democracy. I wanted to say, when it comes to this ceasefire, when it comes to the protests, we have a saying in the Middle East, and it's follow the liar to the door. Hamas has done that by accepting the ceasefire. They've shown that Israel was never, ever really wanting peace and didn't care even about their prisoners of war. Iran followed the liar to the door when they retaliated against Israel, and Israel did not respond. And also, the protesters are following the liars to the door to test the constitution and the right to assembly and freedom of speech. And the liar has been exposed in every turn.
Joe Biden's going into the race in November with the lowest ever public opinion poll ratings. As you say, people even on the right are chanting Genocide Joe at him. Yet he's staggering on. It's too late to replace him now. Do you think that a defeat for Biden in November is now overwhelmingly likely? And what might the implications for foreign policy, not just on the Palestine question, but Ukraine, for example, and NATO? What do you think the implications for that might be?
Well, if you look at the way things are going, the only really big alternative to Biden is probably going to be Trump. And when it comes to the Palestine situation, Trump is probably going to be, I mean, it's hard to imagine that anyone could be worse than Biden, but potentially he is a wild card. And we don't really know what he was going to do on Palestine. His rhetoric can be more damaging, potentially not. When it comes to Ukraine, I suspect that Biden will have a softer policy on, Trump will have a softer policy on Ukraine. Maybe he'll try to shift it so that the energy and the money goes more to Israel than to Ukraine. And I believe there's going to be a lot of assets that inside the US that are going to be threatened by this. And maybe they would even assassinate him or get rid of him or imprison him if he shows that he's going to do that. So if he does try, there's going to be pressures to stop him. So it's probably going to be the exact same thing. If it's the exact same thing, people are going to realize that elections do nothing and their democracy is a sham. Because no matter who you vote for, you're voting for Israel, you're voting for Zionism, and you're voting for the war machine. So I think that unfortunately Biden definitely wants to remain in power because Trump is gonna very likely destabilize the deep state and be a wild card. But they're willing to sacrifice everything, even the United States, for Israel's sake. Nancy Pelosi said herself that if the entire Capitol burns to the ground, the only thing that would remain is their support for Israel.
She did, yes, and it was before breakfast, so she probably hadn't been drinking. Finally, you have been one of the great stars of social media, expressing these kind of views on behalf of many millions, hundreds of millions of people. We've had that space over this last period, but we can't take it for granted, can we? There's every possibility that the counter-offensive, like the banning of TikTok, for example, will intensify now. After all, the bigger the dark secret you're trying to hide, the more hard you've got to work in order to hide it. Are you expecting any kind of intensification of that backlash?
I've been attacked by the Zionist lobby in Australia and in Australian media. And the Australian government is launching a campaign to censor people on Twitter. And I suspect that I might be one of the accounts that they're trying to get Elon Musk to censor. I have been censored off Facebook in the past when they accused me of being a Russian bot. Thankfully, I was able to get my Facebook back. I am surprised I have survived as long as I have, but you know, at the end of the day, we go as long as we go, and we're here for the cause. And nothing is really forever, especially we're on the enemy platforms essentially. And I only hope that I have done the cause enough justice in my words. And if I have the ability to take the time to speak, I think I speak for the people in Syria and the people in Palestine that we cannot allow this Rafah offensive to go unanswered. And I hope that the resistance axis will give Israel what they want and go full force, because if there's not going to be a Palestine, then there's not going to be an Israel either.
Well, they may censor you, they'll never silence you, God willing. Thank you very much indeed, Maram Susli, the Syrian girl. Follow her on all platforms if you have good sense. Let's go to the video wall now and hear what the audience think all the way to Mexico. Charles Stanyan is there with a question for me. Charles, what would you like to say?
Hello, George, and thank you for having me on your show. It's a real honor. After October 7th, I was, needless to say, horrified and appalled since then, and I launched into a diligent study of Israeli and Zionist history. And I must say, I was quite shocked and quite appalled by what I read. I never thought of Israel anything more than a country where all the Jews moved to after World War II. I guess the first thing I came across was the bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946, killing 91, many of whom are Her Majesty's officials, and wounding many other. And then the next thing I came to was the USS Liberty, which was brutally attacked by the Israeli Navy, the Israeli Air Force, and they did all they could to sink her, including several torpedoes that penetrated her hull. And there we had 34 dead, and 34 dead and 165 wounded. And somehow the ship did not sink, much to the chagrin of the Israelis. Apparently the ship had picked up the fact that Israelis had done a preemptive strike on Egypt. And I think Israel wanted to look more like Egypt was attacking them first. So they that failed them. And then the next thing I came across, and of course there are many other things, all the intifadas and everything else that happened. I'm not discounting those things at all, but I'm bringing up these three instances. The third instance was the 1910. I'm sorry, 2010 was the I'm sorry,
Mavi Marmara.
Marmara.
I was involved in that, Charles.
Yeah,
that was the aid ship that Israel boarded in international waters. Thanks, Charles, for that, all the way from La Paz in Mexico. It is, of course, the case that there's one of only a few countries in the world that Her Majesty the Queen never, ever visited, never set foot in Israel. And that was for a reason, the reason you adduced. Israel invented modern terrorism. The people now running Israel, the Likud, Jabotinsky school of thought, were the very people who blew up Her Majesty's civil servants, police officers, army officers in Jerusalem in the King David Hotel. They murdered British soldiers and police officers at will in that period, left two sergeants hanging by a piano wire in the orange groves of Jaffa, wired with booby-trapped bombs, so that when their bodies were recovered, still more Britishers were killed and maimed. They attempted to kill Winston Churchill when he was fighting Adolf Hitler. They did kill his cabinet colleague, Lord Moyne. They did kill. In fact, the man who killed Count Bernadotte of Sweden, the United Nations envoy to Israel-Palestine, the man who pulled the trigger became the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir. Extraordinary. Charles, thanks for that. Let's go closer to home in London, where Neil Harris has a question. Go ahead, Neil.
Thanks for having me on.
Welcome.
So I think that Israel's becoming more and more openly fascist, and the young people in Israel have been absolutely corrupted by Zionism, and the overall situation there is leading to self-destruction. Israel's eventually going to fail from within. I think it's already failed. But in the view of that in general, how do you visualize a future Palestine after this current catastrophe has resolved, which it eventually will, whether it's going to get a lot darker and a lot bloodier, or by some miracle there'll be peace, or sort of a peace.
A very
how would the future look?
Question, Neil. As people your age and mine remember, it's the $64,000 question, as the Yanks used to say. I would be lying if I said I have any vision of what's going to happen next in Palestine. What I'm certain of is that some things will never again be true. It will never again be true that supporting Israel in the world will be a popular thing. Whereas when I started in this cause 50 years ago, you could have fitted all the supporters of the PLO, like me, in a very small hall, maybe even in this studio, across the whole of Britain. Now we are millions, tens of millions, in fact. It will never be glad, confident morning again for Israel in the world. But that does not mean that they will necessarily, imminently, or even in the middle distance collapse, because they continue to have the support of the superpower, the United States, and its vassals its poodles, like Britain, France, Germany, etc. And so as long as these states give them weapons, give them money, give them diplomatic and media cover, it may run for some time yet. Thirdly, that the world is in a process of really very profound change. We talked about Iran earlier, that earlier call, the interview rather with the Syrian girl. Only 10 years ago, Iran would have been restricted to rhetorical condemnation of the crimes of Israel. Now Iran could wipe Israel off the map. And its friends, allies, China and Russia, together with Iran and together with other smaller but important, Brazil and others, in the new organizations that will come to dominate the new world, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and so on. They are more than a match for the United States superpower and its vassals. So the balance of power in the world is changing. That eventually must tell in the frontline states, as the Syrian girl was talking there. Imagine if Jordan either had a different kind of government or its government was forced to change the role that it plays. Imagine Egypt the same. Imagine Saudi Arabia the same. Well, all the time the balance of power is changing. The Palestinian resistance will never go away as long as one Gaza is still alive. There will be a Palestinian resistance. So Israel may go on for some time yet, but its current state of xenophobic, foaming, fervent fascism cannot survive in the middle term, beyond the middle term. That's my view. Thanks, Neil, for the call. David, also in London. Go ahead, David. Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry.
Start at the
George,
beginning.
thank you so much for inviting me. Really flattered to get the invite here. I was very interested in the Syrian girl's comment about Turkey and Syria, offering hollow support to the Palestine people. Because that brings me on to my question, actually. United Arab Emirates Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdul bin Yahed, when he was speaking in 2017, warned the West of admitting Muslim extremists into Europe. The Egyptian government has fortified the border with Gaza, and only in last November, the Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan doesn't want to admit Palestinians into Saudi Arabian territory. In Denmark, in 1992, they admitted 321 Palestinians. By 2019, 64% had criminal records. And also, after the migration of the Palestinians after the 48 and 67 war, it led to a civil war in Lebanon between the Christians and the Palestinians in the south of the country. My question is, should Britain avoid taking in Palestinian refugees?
Well, a very wise man once said, David, a little knowledge is dangerous. And you're the living example of that. A Reader's Digest distortion of the true facts of the situation. I let you speak, even though what you were saying was extremely offensive, because that's the nature of this show. But I'm going to have to educate you, and I'll have to do it bluntly. You'll have to forgive me. First of all, the governments of which you speak are brute dictatorships, yet you pray them in aid of your argument as if somehow we should be impressed by them, as if somehow the Egyptian government, as you put it, fortifying its border, should somehow make us blame the Palestinians rather than blame the Egyptian dictatorship which has fortified its border. Speaks volumes about where you're truly coming from with this question. Maybe Egypt fortified its border against the Israeli tanks that are now sticking their gun turrets through it. Or maybe it didn't want the Palestinian people in Gaza, 2.3 million of them, to pour over their border and live in refugee camps in the Sinai desert. They'd be very wise if that was their thinking. But the idea that it's because they're Palestinians, because they're Arabs, because, although you didn't say it, I infer it, that it's because they're Muslims, that they're going to be, in your word, extremists, is a deeply offensive one. Thirdly, I don't want Palestinian refugees in Britain, but not, I suspect, for the same reason as you. I want the Palestinians to remain in Palestine. That is the right and just demand of all right-thinking people. After all, the only reason you've ever met a Palestinian, if you have, is that 800,000 of them were expelled from their own country in 1948 in the original Nakba, the original catastrophe. That 800,000 has now become many millions. That's the only reason there are any Palestinians outside of Palestine. So it's like so many of these refugee issues. If we hadn't bombed or helped other people to bomb, if we hadn't invaded or supported other people invading other people's countries, they would be happily living in their countries right at this minute. Afghans, maybe it's them you've got the ire against. Afghans are only in Britain because we destroyed Afghanistan. Syrians are only in Britain because we tried to destroy Syria. Iraqis are only in Britain because we tried to destroy Iraq. The real enemy is at home, David. I hope one day you'll realize that. Let's go to North Yorkshire, where Nick Fletcher has a question. Go ahead, Nick.
Hello, George. Thank you for inviting me to the debate. The situation in Gaza is an appalling humanitarian crisis, and leaders seem to be sweeping this under the carpet. How can this change? What do you think could bring peace?
Well, yesterday we had a glimpse of a ceasefire, the terms of which would have been 3 periods of 42 days, in which progressively fighting stopped, prisoners were exchanged, and withdrawal from the occupied Palestinian land in Gaza would have begun and been completed over 3 periods of 42 days. The Palestinians accepted it, as they were asked to do in an answer to me. Last Tuesday, the Deputy Foreign Minister, we don't get to question the actual Foreign Minister because he's not an elected member of Parliament, but the Deputy Foreign Minister said to me, and the Labour shadow Foreign Minister, David Lammy, said to him that the Palestinians were the obstacle to a ceasefire. And then, when the Palestinians offered a ceasefire, accepted the terms that I have just explained, Israel invaded Rafah anyway. As I said in Parliament last Tuesday, I always expected them to do. So, would that have solved the problem? It wouldn't. Would that have been the end? It would not. But it would have been the end of the agony for the children now dead that were celebrating in the streets for a ceasefire just 48 hours ago. It would have saved some lives. It would have allowed some people to recover from famine and disease deliberately engendered among them. It might have led to some political developments that would have taken us at least further away from the danger of all-out catastrophe. But there will be no solution to this that does not involve a Palestinian state. And that's not even on the table. It's just puffs of hot air about a two-state solution, where the so-called Palestinian state is in fact covered by hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers who came from New York, who came from Copenhagen, who came from England and France. The possibility of a Palestinian state looks like a mirage in the desert. It has the appearance of water, but water there is none. So until the balance of power in the world changes, until Western governments either change or are changed, until the new powers become strong enough to impose their will for a new international order solution, there will be none. Thanks for that excellent call. You wouldn't believe this, but 24 hours ago, I was in Tayport in Fife, and I have on the line Robert Bingham, who's in Tayport in Fife. A very lovely little place. Go ahead, Robert.
Anyway, George, thanks for inviting me on. It's great to see you. I'd like to congratulate you firstly on getting back into Parliament and wish you all the best with the Workers' Party.
Thank you, sir.
My question is regarding this association with the LFI, the CFI, and the LDFI, basically the British establishment and the Friends of Israel. Because I mean, having a look at it, it's like, how much influence has this Friends of Israel got on the British Parliament? Is it through donation? Is it through affiliation? And basically, are the Friends of Israel, is it a recorded list? Do they donate to the British political system?
No, it's not a recorded list, Robert. They are revealed by leaks, either from the Israeli side who want to show how strong they are, or by others. We know who are in the Labour Friends of Israel. We know who are in the Conservative Friends of Israel, the Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel. I can promise you there's no Friends of Israel in the Workers' Party, and never will be. But the power that they've got is absolute, Robert. It's absolute. Let me say that no Minister of State for the Middle East in the British Foreign Office for the last 40 years has not been a member of the Friends of Israel. You simply will not be allowed to be the Minister for the Middle East if you are not a friend of Israel. Little Alan Duncan, you may remember him, Conservative Foreign Office Minister. He might have become the top dog, the Foreign Secretary, but for the fact that he was not a friend of Israel, he was never allowed to be the Minister for the Middle East. And he wasn't that great, by the way, but he did have pro-Arab views, at least Gulf pro-Arab views. So their influence is total. Someone like me, and only a very few others, you could count them on one hand, certainly on two, out of 650 people, would dare to stand up in Parliament, as I hope to do later today, and attack what's happened in Rafah and the governments that made it possible. So, again, you see, this comes down to the change we need to make. We need to make it impossible to get elected in Britain if you're a friend of Israel. After all, who would have got elected in Britain if they openly stated they were a friend of apartheid South Africa, or a friend of fascist Italy, a friend of Nazi Germany, because that's the league that Israel's now put itself in. I'm sorry to put it as bluntly as that, but if you're murdering children by the tens of thousands, you're a fascist. And anybody that supports you is supporting fascism. So we have to make it such that these people are forced to rip up their membership of these Friends of Israel. And we can do that because we've got the votes. They've got the seats, but we've got the votes. They only get the seats because we vote for them or don't coherently enough vote against them. Great to see you, Robert. Thanks for the call. Let's go to Essex in England, where Charlie Sansom is on. Charlie.
Hi, George. I hope you're well. My question to you is this. With the obvious political play of your Workers' Party appealing to Muslim voters, do you think the Conservatives in this country, people, not party, are right to be concerned about what appears to be a focus on non-British issues?
Well, it is a British issue, Charlie. We are supplying weapons that are shredding small children. It is a British issue. We are involved at the United Nations, time after time after time, protecting Israel from the diplomatic consequences of its lawbreaking. The head of the International Criminal Court, a Mr. Khan, QC, now KC, is a British jurisdiction. And he's protecting Israel from war crimes. We have judges on the International Criminal Justice, the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the land, which was formed by us. Palestine and Israel were formed by us. We gave Palestine to the Zionists in a promise in 1917 in the Balfour Declaration. On behalf of one people, we promised a second people the land of a third people. I mean, how much British involvement in Palestine do you want me to adumbrate? Because I could go on and on and on about how British this subject of Palestine is. But you started your question with a falsehood. You said that the Workers' Party had a play to get Muslim votes. First of all, the Workers' Party will be standing in 500 constituencies, the length and breadth of Britain. In most of them, there are hardly any Muslims at all. 75% of our members are white British people that look like you and have got names like Charlie and Sansom. We are asking for everybody's vote, every person of conscience. If you look at the galère of talent on the wall right now, most of them are not Muslims. Your foolish conflation of these two things is just that, foolish. Gamal Saleh is in Yemen. Can you believe it? This is an international university. Right enough. Let's go to Yemen, where Gamal Saleh is in the Marib governorate in Yemen. Gamal, welcome.
Yes, welcome. I have a question about the support, the huge support of Zionism from British government. Is voluntarily or there is another force or afraid of Zionism power in the world?
Well, it's both. It's coercive in the sense that it's media and parliamentary suicide to oppose Zionism and oppose the crimes of Israel. That's coercive. It's fear of consequence. Journalist knows when his fingers pause over the word Israel on his or her keyboard that they're going to be in a hell of a lot of trouble if they say anything that is critical of Israel. But it's also voluntary. As I just explained to the last caller, it was Britain that invented the so-called homeland for the Jewish people, which we promised would not prejudice the rights of the existing non-Jewish population. In the Balfour Declaration, we did that. In the room that I'll be sitting in right after this show, we invented it. We brought it into life. It's a British creation. So in that sense, it's voluntary. And the reasons we did it was we wanted a Western outpost in the Arab Middle East and the wider Muslim world. That's why we set it up, to be our little watchdog in the middle of the Arabs, which we then already knew was the site of vast oil treasures, which became much vaster. And then there was gas. That's the reason why we did it. And that's the reason why America took over the role. Now, Karis is in New York. She really totally hates me. That's why she's on next. Karis.
Well, thank you for having me. You keep these outraged rhetorical positions that somehow paint you as this champion and defender of Muslims, but you want British Muslims to forget that you became distrusted by them and persona non grata among them during the Syrian civil war, in which you strongly supported Bashar al-Assad, worked for his interests, and by extension, Iranian and Hezbollah's interests, thus defending the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Sunni Muslims. You've also explicitly denied Uyghur Muslims are being persecuted in China, defended Gaddafi and Milosevic, and opposed Western military intervention to save Bosnian Muslims. You've worked for official state propaganda outlets for basically every single government but your own, it seems. And you ran Viva Palestina at the turn of the decade, an overt Hamas operation in which you handed bags of cash on camera to Hamas, a UK designated terror organization, as well as Hezbollah. So this is clearly breaking a UK sanction law. How can you reconcile claims of support for so-called Muslim victims with your actual support of anti-Muslim oppressors and tyrants as anything other than self-serving opportunism?
Well, if I was persona non grata, it would be difficult to see how it was self-serving opportunism. If the Muslims hated me for my stands, it's a bit rich to then say that I'm taking those stands in order to be more popular. But I gave you lots of rope with which to hang yourself. First of all, it's not Muslims, it's Muslims. So if you're going to be a propagandist for Muslims, it's better if you can pronounce it properly. Secondly, the British Muslims can make their mind up whether you're a better champion for them than me. I suspect they already made that judgment maybe a yard or two into your vile rhetoric, which nonetheless, being a democratic fellow and knowing in advance the kind of poison you were going to deploy, I insisted that you be allowed to speak. Now, you supported the attempt to destroy, using sectarian ploys, the Syrian Arab Republic. I did not. And I prevailed. Syria prevailed. Syria stands as a castle of Arab dignity and of resistance to the Zionist crime in Palestine. You don't like that? You certainly don't like the way it turned out. You did everything you could. The governments you support poured hundreds of millions of pounds, and fanatic extremists, throat cutters, heart eaters, murderers and massacrers into Syria, and you still did not prevail. The governments you support bombed Syria, rocketed Syria, did everything that you could to destroy Syria and see the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda flying over Damascus. I could not accept that. Most British Muslims don't accept it either. And we prevailed. Cry more. Cry more, Karis. I see you in the top corner. Cry more your bitter tears that you failed to destroy Syria. You failed to put ISIS and Al-Qaeda in power in Damascus. I've no doubt you'll try again. I've no doubt that you'll try again there and elsewhere. You are prepared to use any Muslims against other Muslims. You're prepared to fan the flames of sectarian hatred, to weaken and damage the countries that you are charged with destabilizing and breaking up. But I've got news for you. Again, you're going to have to cry more about this. You will never destroy China. China is way, way, way beyond any ability that you have to weaken, divide, and destroy it. So your propaganda has fallen on increasingly stony ground. It is not working. You failed in Syria. You have failed in China. You have failed in your attempt to weaken, divide, break up, balkanize the Russian Federation. We are winning and you are losing. And your hysteria, hyperbole, and very poor pronunciations will not take you any further forward. Well, it's been marvelous. I don't think I've got time for a last call. I'm going to have to wrap. My apologies to Lewis Brackpool in West Sussex, Graham Ammond in Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada, and Kagpar Zajda in Lodz, Poland, and Dominik Szymanski in Warsaw, Poland. I'm sorry I didn't get to you. Try again, either here or on my other programs. It's been marvelous for me. I hope that it was for you. And if it was, why not come back and watch at the same time next week? You can join the audience by emailing us at haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Hope to see you again soon.